This is part 2 of Reasons for Canadian Confederation. We're going to start looking at the political reasons for Canada to confederate. Reason number 2, if Canada could confederate, then the American expansion could be halted. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we've already spoken a fair amount about the fear of manifest destiny. And the fear was that now that the Americans had made their way all the way across the West, so they had from the East Coast to the West Coast, that they intended to annex Canada. Now, we'd already seen the American policy of expanding west, and at this point, the Canadians were concerned that the Americans' attention would turn northward. Now, did they have reason to fear this? Well, in July of 1866, the Americans passed the Annexation Bill, which said, be it enacted by the by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the provinces of New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, Canada, British Columbia, and Vancouver's Island are constituted and admitted as states and territories of the United States of America. So they simply passed a bill that said that we belonged to them. Needless to say, that didn't go down well in Britain or in Canada. When we look at the map, I've got to go back. When we look at the map, this was the part of the United States from 1783. And so then in 1821, let's go to 1803, they purchased Louisiana from France. That was a bit of a dodgy deal, but you learn more about that in American history. In 1821, you remember how they were in the War of 1812, they wanted to claim Florida from Spain. Well, they never were able to do that, so in 1821 they simply bought it. In 1845, they annexed Texas. Texas had been its own country at that point in time. That's where you get all the stories of the Alamo and stuff like that. In 1846, Britain and the United States disputed where the border was supposed to be. Canada suggested that it should go along in here, which would follow the natural passes in the mountains. The Americans thought that was a bad idea because it would mean they would lose this territory up here, and so they complained, and Britain, being more concerned about trade with America than they were about protecting Canadian borders, said, okie dokie, we'll just carry on the 49th parallel. In 1848, Mexico ceded this area in here to the United States, and then in 1853, America purchased this last bit here. So as you can see, from 1783 to 1853, America had moved all the way from one side to the other. So now the fear was they were going to start looking north. So why might the Canadians have been so resistant to the idea of joining the Americans? In order to answer this well, you have to think back to the Loyalists, you have to think back to the War of 1812, you have to think back to some of the other things that we have learned already. Okay, continuing with political reasons. Reason number 3, if Canada confederated, then the number of political parties could be limited and the work of the government could go on. Now, why is this a big deal? Because prior to this, they were in political deadlock. There had been 4 failed governments in 4 years, and the reason for this was that everybody basically had their own party. So you had all these parties that had 2, 3, 4, maybe 20 or even 30 party members, but nothing that really represented all of the people. And so all of these parties were vying for power, so they were all working for their own agendas rather than working together. Social reasons. So reason number 4 for Canada to confederate, if Canada became her own country, especially with the federal system, then the language and culture rights could be guaranteed right across the new country. Now, who would this be important for? Well, of course, this is going to be important for the French, because as the number of English speakers are increasing, their power is being diminished. And they're concerned that if they don't get in on the ground floor of this new country, they're not going to be able to guarantee language and cultural rights. Then there were economic reasons. Reason number 5. Canada could buy Rupert's Land from the Hudson Bay Company. Remember, this is the area that includes what is today Winnipeg. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, there were a lot of young farmers in what is today Ontario and Quebec who could not find land to farm. Remember, families were still very large, so there were 3, 4, 5 sons and daughters, 10, 15 kids in a family. And all of these people wanted to be farmers. Well, of course, there wasn't enough land for them to do that. So many of these young Canadian farmers were actually going to the United States, and they were going into the Oregon territories, the Washington territories, and they were becoming American farmers. Well, we didn't want to lose our young farmers, so if we bought Rupert's Land, we would have a place for these young farmers to go. What it would also do is prevent American creep into our territories. What was happening was we had established the 49th parallel as the boundary between Canada and the United States, but the American farmers that were on the southern side of the border kept looking over and they weren't really seeing that there was any farming going on the northern side of the border, so they simply took the land. And they would creep and creep and creep, and they kept taking and taking and taking land. And we needed to put a stop to that. The other thing that was happening was that there were Americans that were coming across the border, and they were doing a variety of things that upset the Indigenous people in the area, and we needed to stop that so that we could prevent a race war. It was very much a concern of the Canadian government that the Americans would try to start some of the things like they had been doing in their own country, which was a genocide against the Indigenous people. And although most, if not all, of the politicians of the day were incredibly racist, they were certainly not in favor of killing the Indigenous peoples. So, I need you to summarize on your sheet, how would buying Rupert's Land benefit Canada? Okay, we're going to carry on with economic reasons. Reasons number 6 and 7. Number 6, the colonies needed tariff-free trade amongst themselves. As long as they were colonies, they each individually belonged to Great Britain. That meant that if they traded between the colonies, the deal actually was brokered by Great Britain. And Great Britain charged tariffs. It was a way for them to raise money. And they were not about to say that, no, we didn't need to charge each other these tariffs, because that would interfere with the amount of money they were earning. Number 7 is, as a country, we would be able to trade with other countries. Therefore, our economy would increase. This is perhaps the biggest driving factor, and that is the idea of creating big public projects. There wasn't a sufficient tax base in any one colony for these big projects to be done. But if we put all the tax bases together, very, very large projects, and I cannot stress this enough, the railroad was the single most important economic push factor for Confederation. Without this, I don't think anybody would have really pushed for Confederation that hard. Reason number 9. If Canada was a country, we could build and manage our own economy without the interference of Britain. And that was good because Britain's attitude towards us had changed. We used to have this special relationship where Britain paid us more than fair market value for our goods. But they wanted to get rid of that, but they still wanted to control all of our trade, which was going to be difficult for us to then continue to make money. So I want you to think about it and discuss how this focus on economic benefits of Confederation still influence Canada today. All right, before we talk about the essay, what I do want you to do is to upload your completed files, or completed notes rather, and again, this will be marked as a complete or incomplete. It is the essay from which you will get marks. So Confederation was an incredibly controversial idea that resulted in flared tempers, public arguments, and in some cases, family breakdown. The pro-Confederationists would have told the citizens all the reasons listed above. Some they would have talked about accurately, while others would have been exaggerated to better sell the idea of Confederation. The citizens of the time, however, would not have known that this is what they were doing. They would have believed everything that was being said. But what if the people back then knew which was which? What if they knew which ones were exaggerated and which were accurate? Do you think they would have still voted to confederate? Justify your opinion with evidence. Now, give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to switch back to here. All right, so this is your assignment. Use your knowledge of APA formatting to create a short essay, please no more than 500 words, that discusses the following situation. So you've now looked at both sides, so it's time to form an opinion. In the space below, not in the space below, but on a sheet of your own, using good paragraph format, answer the question at the top. So do you think they would have still voted to confederate? Justify your opinion. Don't worry about this part here. We're going to take that out. This is your assessment in here. Please make sure that you read through it. This is where you're going to get your marks. Remember, you are going, the part of the idea here is to remember how to do proper APA formatting. Okay, so I look forward to reading what you've got. Please upload these to me. I will set the due date for this in the notes or in the assessment. All right, if you have any questions, please send me a message and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. Take care, guys. Thanks for listening.